Get him to trauma now. Pressure on the chest dressing.
Prepare the OR and call surgery stat.
Stay with me. Keep his airway clear.
Prepare for rapid imaging and alert the trauma team.
Not yet. I need a moment.
The doors of St. Agnes Memorial burst open at 2:47 in the morning, and the first thing the night shift heard was not a siren. It was silent. 4 black vehicles pulled up outside with no plates and no markings, and 6 men in plain gray suits carried a stretcher through the emergency bay like they owned the building. On it lay a soldier the size of a door frame, chest wrapped in bandages soaked through twice over, one hand cuffed to the rail even though he was barely conscious. A man in a dark coat stepped in front of Dr. Owen Cole and said 4 words that froze the entire department. "This man does not exist." Within minutes, yellow hazard tape sealed off the trauma wing. Armed men stood at every exit. And the soldier, half awake and lost somewhere between a battlefield and a hospital bed, began to scream numbers into the fluorescent light like they were the only thing keeping him alive. Every nurse on shift backed away. Every doctor reached for a phone. Only one woman didn't move. Her name was Nora Kessler, and she had spent 6 years convincing everyone, including herself, that the woman who once decoded ambushes from a bunker in another country was dead and buried. She was about to find out that the woman was still very much alive. If the one patient you were forbidden to help was also the one person who could destroy the life you built to forget who you used to be, would you still walk toward him? Stay with me for this one, because where this story goes next isn't something you'll want to hear about secondhand. Keep watching. Stick with this story to the end and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello and find out how far our story has traveled. Nora Kessler had worked the graveyard shift at St. Agnes for 4 years, and in that time she had learned the particular music of a hospital at rest. The hum of the vending machine outside radiology. The squeak of Marcus Reynolds's shoes as he did his rounds. The soft beeping of monitors meant that, for now, everyone was still breathing. She liked the quiet hours best. They asked nothing of her. St. Agnes sat on the edge of a mid-sized city that liked to think of itself as unremarkable, the kind of place where the biggest headline most weeks was a school board vote or a road closure for repaving. The hospital reflected that same quiet ordinariness. Beige walls. Watercolor prints of lighthouses nobody could name. A cafeteria that closed at 9 and a gift shop that sold the same 3 stuffed bears every December. Nora had chosen it on purpose 6 years ago, the way a person chooses a town with no direct flights to anywhere, because ordinary was exactly what she'd needed after a life spent listening to the sound of things falling apart in real time. That particular Tuesday night had started like every other. A twisted ankle in Bay 1. An elderly man with chest pain that turned out to be indigestion and considerable relief. Marcus Reynolds had brought in a box of day-old donuts from the bakery near his apartment, and the break room had smelled like burnt coffee and powdered sugar for most of the shift. Nora had been 3 sips into her second cup, reviewing a chart at the nurse's station, half listening to Priya complain about a difficult discharge, when the ordinary night ended without warning. That night, the quiet ended the moment the ambulance bay doors slammed open without an ambulance in sight. She counted the men before she counted anything else. Old habit. 6 of them, plus the man in the coat who didn't carry anything but authority. "Where's the attendance?" the man in the coat asked, and his voice had the flat, practiced calm of someone used to being obeyed instantly. Dr. Owen Cole came around the corner still buttoning his coat. "I'm Dr. Cole. What am I looking at?" "A patient requiring immediate stabilization." The man handed over a folder that was almost entirely black lines. "No name. No history. No questions. I can't treat a man I know nothing about." "You can and you will." The man's eyes flicked past Cole to the rest of the staff gathering near the desk. "Everyone in this wing is now operating under a federal quarantine order. Nothing that happens in this room leaves this room." Nora stood at the nurse's station, clipboard forgotten in her hand, watching the stretcher roll past her. The soldier's eyes were open, unfocused, tracking the ceiling lights like they were something dangerous. His jaw worked around words that didn't quite form. Dried blood had turned the collar of his uniform a color that wasn't a color anymore. And beneath the surface panic, underneath the blood and the bandages, she recognized something she hadn't seen in 6 years. It was the exact rhythm of a man trying to hold a line that had already broken. Nobody else in this hospital would know what that meant. She wished she didn't either. "Get him into Bay 3, Dr. Cole ordered, and the team moved fast, practiced, professional, right up until the soldier's hand shot out and closed around a nurse's wrist hard enough to make her cry out. "Grid 7, the soldier said, voice cracking. "Tell command Grid 7 is compromised. Tell them," his whole body arched off the stretcher. "Tell them I can hear the birds." The birds mean they're close. The man in the coat, unbothered, checked his watch. He does this. It passes. It doesn't look like it's passing, Nora said quietly before she could stop herself. The man in the coat looked at her for the first time, really looked, and something behind his eyes sharpened. And you are? Nora Kessler. Charge nurse. Stay behind the desk, Miss Kessler. This isn't your concern. She didn't answer him. She was already watching the soldier's chest rise and fall in short, ragged pulls, and doing the kind of math she'd promised herself she would never do again. Hospital Administrator Diane Forsyth arrived within the hour, robe barely traded for a blazer, hair still damp from being woken out of sleep. She found the man in the coat standing near the nurse's station like he'd been assigned there permanently. I run this hospital, Diane said. You don't get to seal a wing of it without my signature on something. You'll have paperwork by morning, the man answered. For tonight, you have a federal directive and a patient who needs to be treated quietly. Quietly isn't a medical term. It is tonight. Diane's eyes moved past him to the trauma bay, to the shapes of her staff pressed against the far wall, to the yellow tape stretched crooked across a doorway that had never needed it before. Whatever she saw there took the fight out of her voice, at least for the moment. Dr. Cole, she said instead, keep me updated. Every hour. Every 15 minutes, he answered, already walking away. Nora had seen frightened administrators before, the kind who worried more about lawsuits than patients. Diane Forsyth's fear looked different. It looked like a woman doing math on how many rules she was about to break to protect someone she hadn't even met yet. Nurse Priya Anand appeared at Nora's elbow, voice low. Is it true he's military? One of the transport guys let it slip. Special operations, maybe? I don't know, Nora lied. You went pale when they wheeled him past. It's 2 a.m, Priya. Everyone looks pale. Priya didn't push, though her eyes lingered a moment too long before she moved off to restock a supply cart nobody needed restocked. Nora exhaled and made herself walk the length of the corridor once, twice, the way she used to pace outside a comms room while waiting for a signal that refused to come through clean. Behind the glass, the soldier's mouth kept forming the same 2 words. Grid 7. Over and over, quiet enough that only someone who already knew what they meant would recognize them as anything more than fever talk. She knew. By the time hazard tape crossed the entrance to Bay 3, the soldier had a name on his chart that wasn't a name at all. John Doe Federal Hold. Dr. Cole tried twice to get closer and was stopped both times by agents who didn't bother explaining themselves. The rest of the staff gathered at a careful distance, the way people gather to watch a storm they hope stays out at sea. Then the storm came ashore. The soldier's back arched, his restraint strap tore free at one buckle, and he came half upright on the bed with a sound that didn't belong in a hospital. It was the sound of a man fighting an enemy that only he could see. Sergeant Miller, stand down, one of the agents shouted, which told Nora 2 things at once. First, that they knew exactly who he was. Second, shouting orders at a man mid-flashback was the fastest way to make things worse. Everybody out. Dr. Cole called, retreating a step. Clear the bay. Nurses scattered. A security guard near the door found something urgent to attend to on the other side of the building. Even charge nurse Marcus Reynolds, a man who had once talked down a patient wielding a broken 4-pole, backed away with his hands raised. 6 years of pretending had built a wall around the part of her that used to run toward exactly this kind of chaos. She felt the wall crack down the middle. Ma'am, step back, an agent told Nora, one hand hovering near his hip, the other stretched out to block her path. This is a federal matter. He's in the hospital, Nora said. That makes it a medical matter. Not today, it doesn't. She watched the soldier's hands claw at the empty air, fighting something only he could see, and she watched the number on the monitor beside him climb past 140. Whatever training had built him into someone strong enough to break a restraint strap was the same training keeping his heart hammering itself toward a wall it couldn't survive hitting. If his heart rate doesn't come down, she said, mostly to herself, he's going to put himself into cardiac arrest before your people ever get a chance to explain what Grid 7 means. The agent didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence told her the wing wasn't sealed off to protect the hospital. It was sealed off to protect a secret, and the soldier thrashing against his own memories was standing directly in the middle of it. Dr. Cole reached her side, breathing hard. Nora, we can't sedate him without knowing what's in his system already. We don't have a chart, we don't have allergies, we don't have anything. I know. So what do we do? She looked past the tape at the man who used to be called Sergeant Miller, at the way his mouth kept shaping the same broken phrase over and over. and for the first time in 6 years she let herself remember the sound of her own call sign. Behind her, one of the younger nurses had started to cry, quietly, the kind of crying that comes from watching something terrible and being told there is nothing you're allowed to do about it. Nora didn't blame her. Fear like that had a way of making even trained professionals forget every instinct they'd built a career on. She thought of the years she'd spent learning to separate panic from the person underneath it, the way a good handler could hear the difference between a soldier who was gone and a soldier who was simply lost. Jackson Miller, whoever he really was beneath the chart that called him nothing at all, wasn't gone. She could hear it in the shape of his shouting, in the specific repetitive terror of a man trying to warn people about a danger that had already passed. That kind of fear had a door in it. She had been trained once to find that door and knock. "I think," she said slowly, "I might know how to reach him." Dr. Cole stared at her like she'd spoken in another language. "How?" "I can't explain it standing here. Nora, if you know something about this patient, I need to hear it before you do anything else. My license is on the line and so is his life." She hesitated, the old instinct to say nothing rising up in her like a reflex. 6 years of silence didn't unlearn itself in a single hallway. But Owen Cole had covered for her twice when she'd needed a shift moved without questions, had never once pried into the parts of her history she kept locked, and right now his eyes held nothing but the plain, exhausted trust of a colleague who needed the truth. "Years ago, before I was a nurse, I worked a job that doesn't officially exist," she said. "I talked to soldiers over the radio when things went wrong overseas. I think I might have talked to him." Cole's jaw tightened, not with suspicion, but with the sudden understanding of a man realizing the ground under his hospital had just shifted. "That folder they handed me. It's blacked out because of you? It's blacked out because of a lot of people. I'm only one of them." Marcus Reynolds jogged over, breathless. "Doctor," his oxygen just dipped again. 91 and falling. "We're out of time," Nora said. "Then go," Cole told her, stepping back to let her pass. "Whatever you're about to do, do it fast." Beyond the tape, the man in the coat was on his phone, voice low and clipped, the posture of someone reporting bad news to someone worse. He hadn't noticed yet that the woman he'd told to stay behind the desk was already moving toward the very line he'd drawn. Before St. Agnes, before the quiet graveyard shifts and the vending machine hum she'd grown to love, Nora Kessler had answered to a different name in a room with no windows, 3 time zones away from anyone who loved her. They called her Wren back then because a wren is small and easy to miss and impossible to silence once it starts singing. She had been 26, fluent in 3 languages and fast enough with a radio that a colonel twice her age used to say she could talk a man out of a burning building using nothing but the right 16 words. Her job had been simple in description and merciless in practice. Listen to broken signals from teams pinned down in places the news never mentioned, translate the chaos into something usable, and get every one of them home. Most nights she did. One night she hadn't. A relay had failed at the worst possible second, a coordinate had gone out 11 seconds late, and a 4-man scouting team had walked into a position that was supposed to be clear. 3 came home. She had never learned all their names because the program that employed her didn't believe in names surviving longer than the mission did. She only knew the one she'd never stopped hearing in her sleep. Grid 7. She had left the program 4 months later, changed her surname from Winslow to Kessler, and rebuilt herself 1 nursing school semester at a time until the woman called Wren felt like somebody else's ghost story. Now that ghost story was thrashing against a hospital bed 20 feet away, repeating the exact words that had haunted 6 years of her quiet nights, and something in Nora's chest told her this could not be a coincidence. The program never told its handlers what happened to the men on the other end of the radio. That was the design. You gave them a coordinate, they lived or they didn't, and either way you were rotated to a new call sign before you could learn their faces. Nora had spent 6 years assuming that mercy, if it could be called that, had spared her from ever meeting the consequences of that failed relay in person. She understood now that it had only delayed the meeting. She remembered the training room where she'd first learned the phrase every operator in that program carried like a second heartbeat, a string of words built to cut through panic, drugs, concussion, anything that might separate a soldier from his own name in the field. She remembered the instructor's voice, flat and serious. "If you ever have to use this outside a mission, it means everything else has already failed. Use it anyway. A broken system is better than no system at all." She had never once expected to use it in a hospital corridor, 6 years and one entire identity removed from the woman who'd learned it. The memory of that night came back to her whole, the way it always did, uninvited and complete. A concrete room with humming servers instead of windows. A headset that had grown too warm against her ear after 11 straight hours on shift. A voice on the other end of the radio, young, breathless, asking for a coordinate she had already sent twice. Confirm grid 7 is clear, the voice had said. Confirm and we move. She remembered checking the feed, watching the relay indicator blink from red to green a fraction of a second too fast to trust completely, and sending the confirmation anyway because the system said it was safe and the system had never been wrong before that night. She remembered the 11 seconds of static that followed. She remembered the sound that came through the radio after that, a sound she had spent 6 years trying not to remember, and the silence that came after the sound, which was somehow worse. 3 men had walked out of that valley. A 4th had not. The program's official record listed the incident as a training casualty, sealed within a week, its handlers reassigned before grief had a chance to become a pattern anyone might notice. Nora had requested a transfer out within the month. She had never learned the surviving 3 men's real names. She had never known until tonight that one of them had spent 6 years carrying grid 7 the same way she had, alone in the dark, waiting for someone who understood to finally show up. She understood now why some part of her had frozen the second she saw him wheeled through those doors. Some part of her had been waiting for this exact moment since the night it happened, the way you wait for a debt you know is coming due even when you stop checking the mail for it. Dr. Cole caught up to her by the supply closet, where she was pulling off her cardigan and rolling her sleeves like she meant to climb into the ring. Nora, whatever you're about to do, the federal agents will not let you near him. They won't have a choice. They're armed. I'm not planning to fight them, Owen. I'm planning to walk past them. He studied her face for a long moment, the kind of look a man gives someone he's known for years and is only now starting to actually see. Who are you? A fair question. One she hadn't answered honestly in a long time, not even to herself. Someone who used to be very good at talking people back from the edge, she said. I'm about to find out if I still am. She didn't wait for his answer. She walked toward the yellow tape with her shoulders back and her hands steady, the old training rising in her like something that had never actually left, just waiting patiently for a reason to come back. Before St. Agnes, before the quiet graveyard shifts and the vending machine hum she'd grown to love, Nora Kessler had answered to a different name in a room with no windows, 3 time zones away from anyone who loved her. They called her Wren back then because a wren is small and easy to miss and impossible to silence once it starts singing. She had been 26, fluent in 3 languages and fast enough with a radio that a colonel twice her age used to say she could talk a man out of a burning building using nothing but the right 16 words. Her job had been simple in description and merciless in practice. Listen to broken signals from teams pinned down in places the news never mentioned, translate the chaos into something usable and get every one of them home. Most nights she did. One night she hadn't. A relay had failed at the worst possible second, a coordinate had gone out 11 seconds late, and a 4-man scouting team had walked into a position that was supposed to be clear. 3 came home. She had never learned all their names because the program that employed her didn't believe in names surviving longer than the mission did. She only knew the one she'd never stopped hearing in her sleep. Grid 7. She had left the program 4 months later, changed her surname from Winslow to Kessler, and rebuilt herself 1 nursing school semester at a time until the woman called Wren felt like somebody else's ghost story. Now that ghost story was thrashing against a hospital bed 20 feet away, repeating the exact words that had haunted 6 years of her quiet nights, and something in Nora's chest told her this could not be a coincidence. The program never told its handlers what happened to the men on the other end of the radio. That was the design. You gave them a coordinate, they lived or they didn't, and either way you were rotated to a new call sign before you could learn their faces. Nora had spent 6 years assuming that mercy, if it could be called that, had spared her from ever meeting the consequences of that failed relay in person. She understood now that it had only delayed the meeting. She remembered the training room where she'd first learned the phrase every operator in that program carried like a second heartbeat, a string of words built to cut through panic, drugs, concussion, anything that might separate a soldier from his own name in the field. She remembered the instructor's voice, flat and serious. If you ever have to use this outside a mission, it means everything else has already failed. Use it anyway. A broken system is better than no system at all. She had never once expected to use it in a hospital corridor, 6 years and one entire identity removed from the woman who'd learned it. The memory of that night came back to her whole, the way it always did, uninvited and complete. A concrete room with humming servers instead of windows. A headset that had grown too warm against her ear after 11 straight hours on shift. A voice on the other end of the radio, young, breathless, asking for a coordinate she had already sent twice. Confirm grid 7 is clear, the voice had said. Confirm and we move. She remembered checking the feed, watching the relay indicator blink from red to green a fraction of a second too fast to trust completely, and sending the confirmation anyway because the system said it was safe and the system had never been wrong before that night. She remembered the 11 seconds of static that followed. She remembered the sound that came through the radio after that, a sound she had spent 6 years trying not to remember, and the silence that came after the sound, which was somehow worse. 3 men had walked out of that valley. A 4th had not. The program's official record listed the incident as a training casualty, sealed within a week, its handlers reassigned before grief had a chance to become a pattern anyone might notice. Nora had requested a transfer out within the month. She had never learned the surviving 3 men's real names. She had never known until tonight that one of them had spent 6 years carrying Grid 7 the same way she had, alone in the dark, waiting for someone who understood to finally show up. She understood now why some part of her had frozen the second she saw him wheeled through those doors. Some part of her had been waiting for this exact moment since the night it happened, the way you wait for a debt you know is coming due even when you've stopped checking the mail for it. Dr. Cole caught up to her by the supply closet, where she was pulling off her cardigan and rolling her sleeves like she meant to climb into the ring. Nora, whatever you're about to do, the federal agents will not let you near him. They won't have a choice. They're armed. I'm not planning to fight them, Owen. I'm planning to walk past them. He studied her face for a long moment, the kind of look a man gives someone he's known for years and is only now starting to actually see. Who are you? A fair question. One she hadn't answered honestly in a long time, not even to herself. Someone who used to be very good at talking people back from the edge, she said. I'm about to find out if I still am. She didn't wait for his answer. She walked toward the yellow tape with her shoulders back and her hands steady, the old training rising in her like something that had never actually left, just waiting patiently for a reason to come back. The agent nearest the tape put a hand up the moment she got close. Ma'am, I already told you. And I'm telling you that in about 90 seconds, that man's heart is going to give out, and then your secret dies with him, Nora said, low enough that only he could hear it. Is that the outcome your orders were written for? The agent hesitated, and hesitation was all she needed. She ducked under the tape before he found the words to stop her, and Dr. Cole's voice rose behind her, half warning, half plea. Nora, don't. She didn't look back. The bay felt smaller from inside the tape than it had from behind it. Monitors chirped their steady warnings, the smell of antiseptic mixed with old blood, and somewhere down the hall a cartwheel squeaked in a rhythm that suddenly sounded very far away. Nora was aware of every eye in the department fixed on her back, the agents' hands hovering near their belts, Dr. Cole's breath held somewhere behind her, and none of it mattered as much as the man in front of her fighting a war that had ended years ago and never actually stopped. She crossed the last few feet to the bed slowly, palms open, the way you approach anything wounded and afraid, whether it walks on 2 legs or 4. The soldier's eyes found her, wild and unseen, still caught somewhere in a memory that had never actually let go of him. Grid 7, he said again, voice raw. Somebody tell them Grid 7. Grid 7 is clear, Nora said. He stilled, just slightly, like an animal catching an unfamiliar scent. Say again, he rasped. She knelt beside the bed, closed her hand gently over his, and spoke the phrase she had buried for 6 years, the one every operator in that old program had memorized in case the whole system ever failed at once. It was 7 words that meant nothing to anyone outside that room, and everything to the man in front of her. If she was wrong about who he was, she would look like a lunatic in front of an entire hospital and several armed federal agents. She said it anyway. Ren copies. Ren has you. Stand down. The soldier went completely still. His eyes, which had been fixed on some horror only he could see, slowly refocused, dragging themselves back into the room, back into the hospital, back onto her face. His breathing, which had been tearing in and out of him in ragged pulls, began to slow, one shaking breath at a time. That's not possible, he whispered. I know, she said. Sit with it anyway. You're safe. You're in a hospital. My name is Nora and I've got you. Behind the tape, the entire wing had gone silent. Dr. Cole stood frozen mid-step. Nurse Priya Anand had one hand pressed to her mouth. The man in the coat, for the first time since he'd walked through the ambulance bay doors, looked like he had lost control of something he thought was already his. The soldier's grip tightened around her hand, not with panic this time, but the way a person held onto a rope they weren't sure existed. Ren, he said again, softer, disbelieving. You're supposed to be a ghost story. So are you, Nora answered. Looks like we're both still here. Behind her, someone let out a breath that turned into a shaky laugh, quickly swallowed. The man in the coat lowered his phone, staring at the two of them like a chess piece had just moved on its own. Dr. Cole ducked under the tape without waiting for permission, medical bag in hand, and the rest of the trauma team followed a half-second later, the unseen wall that had kept them frozen for the last 10 minutes finally breaking apart. She had crossed a line the moment she stepped over that tape, and she knew it. There would be reports written about tonight, questions asked by people with far more authority than the man in the coat. None of that mattered yet. What mattered was the way Jackson's shoulders had finally dropped an inch, the tension bleeding slowly out of a body that had been braced for a fight no one else in the room could see. Vitals, Dr. Cole said, all business now that the door had opened for him. Let's see what we're actually dealing with. The calm didn't last because calm rarely gets to. The moment the soldier's panic eased, his body started telling a different truth. His breathing turned shallow and quick, his lips lost their color, and the number on the monitor that had spiked from fear now dropped for a far more dangerous reason. Owen. Nora called, and Dr. Cole was already moving, tape or no tape, agents or no agents. Talk to me, he said, arriving at her side and pulling back the outer layer of bandage. Whoever field-dressed this wound packed it wrong, Nora said, her hands finding the problem before her eyes fully confirmed it. There's a slow bleed under here they missed, and his breath sounds are down on the left side. Collapsed lung? Getting there. The man in the coat pushed forward. We need to move him. No. There's a secure transport. If you move him in this condition he will not survive the drive, Nora said, not even turning her head. You can explain that to whoever you answer to. Miss Kessler. Doctor, she corrected, sharper than she meant to, get me a chest tube kit and Page respiratory. Owen, I need 4 hands in 30 seconds, not an argument. Halsey grabbed her arm before she could turn away, his grip firm but not unkind, the grip of a man used to being the last word in any room. Miss Kessler, I need you to understand the position you're putting me in. She looked down at his hand, then back up at his face, and something in her expression made him let go on his own. The only position I care about right now is the one keeping this man's lung from collapsing entirely, she said. You can have your conversation with me after he's breathing on his own. Not before. He didn't try to stop her again. Something in her voice made even the agent step back. Dr. Cole called out orders, the trauma team surged back into the bay despite the tape still hanging uselessly across the doorway, and Nora worked with a focus she hadn't used in years, steady hands finding the exact spot between 2 ribs where the pressure needed to be released. The soldier gripped her sleeve the entire time, eyes locked on her face like she was the only fixed point in a world that kept sliding sideways. Stay, he said, teeth clenched against the pain. Please. Stay. I'm not going anywhere. Respiratory therapy arrived at a run, and for 90 seconds the bay became exactly the kind of controlled chaos Nora had trained her whole nursing career to move through without flinching. Someone called out oxygen saturation numbers. Someone else prepped a line. Dr. Cole's hands moved fast and sure, and Nora stayed exactly where Jackson needed her, one hand steady against his shoulder, her voice low and constant in his ear the entire time. You're doing fine, she told him again and again, not because it was strictly true yet but because she remembered exactly how much a steady voice could do for a person whose whole world had narrowed down to pain and fear. Stay with me. Just breathe when I breathe. He matched her breath for breath, ragged at first, then slower, then almost even, and somewhere in that rhythm the monitor's alarm finally quieted into a soft, steady beep that meant, for now, he had won. When his breathing finally evened out and the monitor's tone dropped back into something survivable, the room let out a collective breath it hadn't realized it was holding. Dr. Cole looked at Nora with something between admiration and disbelief. Where did you learn to do that? Somewhere far from here, she said. I'll explain when there's time. The soldier's hand found hers again, weaker now, but no less certain. Jackson, he said. My name is Jackson Miller. Not John Doe. Not Sergeant. Jackson. 6 years of silence, and the man responsible for the worst night of her life had just handed her the one thing that program never allowed. A name. I know who you are, she said quietly. I think I've known you longer than you realize. His eyes searched her face, exhausted, aching, and slowly filling with a different kind of recognition. Grid 7, he said. You were the voice on the radio. The one who gave us the all clear. Her throat tightened around the truth she'd carried alone for 6 years. Yes. You saved 3 of us that night. I lost one of you that night, she said, and for the first time in a long time, she let someone see exactly how much that had cost her. Jackson's grip on her hand didn't loosen. If anything, it tightened. Then we're both still carrying him, he said. Maybe it's time we stopped carrying him alone. She had spent 6 years believing that grief carried alone was somehow safer, cleaner, less likely to hurt anyone else. Sitting there with his hand in hers, She understood for the first time how much that belief had cost her. Behind them, the man in the coat had gone very quiet, watching the two of them with the expression of someone recalculating a plan that had just become considerably more complicated. Later, once the trauma team had finished stabilizing him and the baby had settled into the low hum of recovery, Nora found herself back at his bedside without quite deciding to be there. The overhead lights had been dimmed. Somewhere outside the window, the sky was starting to turn the pale gray that came right before sunrise. "You didn't have to come back," Jackson said, voice rough with exhaustion but no longer with panic. "I wanted to." "Why?" She considered lying the way she'd lied to Priya hours earlier, the way she'd lied to herself for 6 years. She was too tired for it now. "Because I've spent 6 years wondering what happened to the men on the other end of that radio, and tonight I finally got an answer, and I wasn't ready for the answer to walk back out of my life so soon after I found it." He studied her for a long moment, the exhaustion in his face softened by something gentler underneath it. "For what it's worth," he said, "I used to picture the voice on that radio as someone a lot less real. A recording maybe. Not someone who'd sit up all night holding a stranger's hand in a hospital hallway." "I'm not sure I was ever a stranger," she said. "Not really. Not after that night." "No," he agreed. "I guess you weren't." Neither of them said anything else for a while. She stayed anyway, her hand resting near his on the blanket, close enough to feel the steady warmth of him, and for the first time in 6 years the silence between them felt like company instead of penance. The man in the coat introduced himself an hour later as Colonel Grant Halsey, though by then Nora had already guessed most of what mattered about him. He found her outside the supply room, arms crossed, waiting the way men like him always waited, patient and certain of the outcome. "You had no authorization to identify yourself to that patient," he said. "I had a patient in cardiac distress and a program that let him get there," she said. "You can write me up after he's stable." "Grid 7 was a training exercise," Halsey said. "One that went wrong because a relay failed. That's all it ever was." "Then why seal off an entire hospital wing to keep one broken man's memories quiet?" Halsey's jaw tightened just slightly, just enough. "Because the exercise wasn't supposed to happen on foreign soil, and it wasn't supposed to leave 4 operators exposed without extraction clearance. If that gets out, careers end. Mine included." "A man died," Nora said. "You're worried about your career." "I'm worried about the 11 other operators from that program who are still active. If Sergeant Miller's file surfaces, so does theirs. Then protect them the right way. Not by disappearing a wounded man into an off-grid facility where nobody has to answer for what happened to him." Halsey studied her for a long moment. "You understand this better than most civilians would." "I'm not a civilian," Nora said. "Not really. I never fully left. I just stopped answering the name." Halsey studied her a moment longer, and something in his posture shifted, just slightly, from command to something closer to weariness. "You have no idea what I've had to bury to keep that program functional. The moment one file surfaces, all of it surfaces. Careers, clearances, 11 other lives currently deployed under identities that don't officially exist. Then maybe the program was never built to protect anyone," Nora said. "Maybe it was only ever built to protect itself." "That's an easy thing to say from a hospital hallway." "It's an easy thing to say because it's true, Colonel. You had a man in this building thrashing so hard he tore a restraint strap, and your first instinct was to move him somewhere quieter, not somewhere safer. Those aren't the same thing and you know it." Halsey didn't answer that. He didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. Dr. Cole found her 20 minutes later, phone in hand, expression somewhere between furious and impressed. "Hospital administration is getting calls from Washington. Someone wants Sergeant Miller transferred within the hour. He can't be moved. Not with that chest wound. I told them that. They said the transfer order supersedes medical judgment." Nora walked into Bay 3 to find Jackson awake, pale, and watching the door like he expected soldiers to walk through it any second. "They're going to try to take you," she said, no point softening it. "I figured." His voice was steadier now, though his hand still trembled against the blanket. "I'm not going anywhere without you. That's not how any of this works." "Then let's make it work that way." His eyes held hers, steady despite everything his body had been through. "You're the only person in this building who ever told me the truth without being ordered to. I'm not walking out of here without the one person who's ever actually seen me." She had spent 6 years telling herself that walking away from that program meant she'd also walked away from the part of her that mattered, the part capable of standing between someone and the machinery that wanted to erase them. Looking at Jackson, she understood how wrong she'd been. If I do this, she said quietly, it means both our names come out. Yours and mine. Grid 7 stops being a secret. I know. You'll lose whatever cover they've built to protect you. I already lost more than that a long time ago. His hand found hers again, warmer this time, less desperate and more certain. I'd rather lose the cover story than lose the first honest conversation I've had in years. She looked at him for a long moment, at the exhaustion behind his eyes and the steady way he held her gaze despite it, and felt something in her chest loosen that had been locked tight for 6 years. Then we do it together, she said. Truth and consequences both. The story that eventually reached the hospital administrator, and later a very uncomfortable congressional aide, was simpler than Colonel Halsey had wanted and more honest than his program had planned for. A training exercise had gone wrong on foreign soil. A relay had failed. A man had died, and 3 others had carried the weight of that failure in silence for 6 years because the system that used them had no interest in helping them heal, only in making sure they stayed quiet. Dr. Cole backed Nora completely, documenting every irregularity in the transfer order and refusing to release a patient he judged medically unfit to move. Administrator Diane Forsyth, initially furious about the liability a federal quarantine had dropped on her hospital, became something closer to an ally once she understood the full shape of what had almost happened inside her building. By morning, Colonel Halsey's plan to quietly relocate Jackson had collapsed under its own weight, buried by exactly the kind of daylight it had been built to avoid. The congressional aide who eventually reviewed the incident report did not undo 6 years of secrecy overnight. Programs like the one that had trained Nora and deployed Jackson rarely close with a single signature. But an internal review was opened. A mandatory mental health protocol was attached to every future exercise conducted on foreign soil, and the 11 operators Halsey had been so desperate to protect were quietly moved into a support structure that had never existed for them before. It wasn't justice exactly. It was closer to accountability, which Nora had learned a long time ago was usually the most a person could hope for. Jackson stayed at St. Agnes for 11 more days. Nora sat with him through most of them, on breaks, after shifts, in the slow hours when the hospital exhaled and let its patients simply rest. They talked about the night neither of them had ever fully survived, about the operator they'd both lost, about the version of themselves that program had built and then discarded once it no longer needed them. Somewhere in those 11 days, without either of them deciding it on purpose, the woman who used to be Wren and the man who used to be a name on a black-lined folder became, simply, Nora and Jackson. I used to think surviving meant never talking about it, she told him on the last night before his discharge, sitting in the chair beside his bed with the lights low. Turns out it just meant I was still hiding. I used to think the only people who could understand me were the ones who'd been there, he said. Turns out I just needed one person willing to listen without flinching. I flinched plenty. You still stayed. She reached for his hand, the same hand she'd held under fluorescent light while his heart rate climbed toward a wall it almost didn't survive, and found it steady now, warm, entirely present. I'm not planning to stop, she said. He brought her hand to his lips, slow and certain, the kind of gesture that needed no further explanation. Good, he said. Because I already told Halsey I'm listing you as my emergency contact. Try to get out of that. She laughed, surprised by how easily it came, how long it had been since laughter arrived without her having to reach for it first. 3 months later, St. Agnes Memorial opened a new transitional care program for veterans recovering from both physical wounds and the ones no chart could measure, built on the idea that healing required honesty long before it required a diagnosis. Nora Kessler ran it. Jackson Miller, once cleared by 3 separate physicians and 1 very stubborn nurse, became its first graduate and not long after, one of its most trusted mentors. The first morning the program opened its doors, Nora stood in the doorway of a converted conference room that now held soft chairs instead of a boardroom table, a coffee machine that actually worked, and a whiteboard with nothing written on it yet. Jackson leaned against the frame beside her, arms crossed, watching the first small group of veterans file in with the same wary posture he'd once carried into St. Agnes on a stretcher. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. This is the first time I've built something instead of just surviving it. You'll be good at it. You were good at it with me back when I was considerably harder to reach. You weren't that hard to reach, she said. You just needed someone willing to cross the tape. He caught her hand as the last of the group settled into their chairs, and for a moment neither of them moved to join them, content to stand there a second longer in the quiet of a room built entirely out of second chances. Dr. Cole stopped by that afternoon to see the program in motion, and found Diane Forsyth already there, clipboard in hand, quietly proud of the wing she had once nearly lost to a federal quarantine order. Marcus Reynolds brought coffee for the whole group without being asked, the way he always did. Priya Anand, who had spent 6 years thinking Nora Kessler was simply a very private woman, finally understood exactly what kind of private, and liked her better for it. Colonel Halsey never fully recovered his old authority over the program that had once employed both Nora and Jackson, though he kept his career quietly reassigned to an oversight role that made sure no relay ever again went unverified past the point where it might cost someone a name. Nora heard, secondhand, that he'd started attending the review meetings without needing to be summoned. It wasn't forgiveness. It was closer to the accountability she had asked him for on the worst night of his career, arriving late, but arriving all the same. Neither Nora nor Jackson ever went back to the names the old program had given them. They didn't need to. They had finally found the one thing that program never once offered either of them. A place where the truth was allowed to exist out loud, and a person willing to stay and hear it for as long as it took. If this story reminded you that the truth is always worth more than the secret keeping it buried, you already understand exactly why Nora and Jackson's story mattered enough to tell. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. If you have made it this far into her story, thank you for staying with her through the storm. Subscribe to catch the next one and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one and I would love more than you know to say hello.